Hello Tracy, I made this video to present my project for the developing your data skills. So for the class of data visualization, I worked in this project where, well, what we have here is the World Health Organization data on suicide and GDP per capita in the last few years. It's around 30 years of data. So the point of this was finding if there's any correlation between GDP and suicide rate. So what I found about this data is like WHO just basically shows numbers for this problem of suicide in every country, but it's very cold. And it's also very inconsistent. Like there's no, they don't get too much in depth with it because it's a taboo topic, or I don't know. So like here it's like from 85 to 2016. What we have here is, for example, this 20 countries with the highest suicide rate is the biggest Lithuania, and there's this all these countries that don't seem to have. Sometimes they have stuff in common, but sometimes no. So especially when you take into consideration the economical part of it. So to analyze this, I went through a few iterations of trying to understand it. So we have this bar chart and this pie chart, and here's the same top 20 but for GDP in the same period. So it was it seemed like there was no relationship or something like that. But when you put them together, it just painted a weird picture. So Lithuania is not that bad in shape economically. They have these phenomena, and then there are others like the Russians that are very okay, but still up there. And then this part was, I guess, what triggered the final part of the project, which is, it's the WHO is posting suicide as rate. So how common is suicide in parts of the world? But it's a phenomenon that is not the same everywhere. So I guess that's why I started to find it weird that they compared it in the same terms for different countries, right? So maybe in some parts it's a cultural thing. Maybe in some parts it does have relationship with poverty or with economic wealth, or weather, or others, or religion, right? So the thing with suicide rate just started to sound completely wrong to me. So so for example, this one is the suicide rate and GDP per capita in Lithuania, because Lithuania is let's say like it has been constantly the one with biggest suicide rates on all these years, and then this shape kind of like corresponds. So GDP goes up and then suicide goes down, but then it seems a bit corresponding. It seemed like it made sense, but for example, we have here Japan, which it's not correlational. Sometimes GDP goes up and suicide goes up, like here, right? So I don't know. You can go through the GitHub. I'll send you the link, and there's all of this kind of like iterations for how it was analyzed. So these bar charts and line charts were not good enough to explain or to answer any question at all. So that's why I did a Tableau repository. So this is I used all this data here for this repository, and what we have here is three things. So each country has a different color. This corresponds to their GDP. So greener lands are in better shape, have been in better shape throughout these 30 years economically, right? So here we see Norway is really great shape, and here we see Sri Lanka bad shape, right? And every country has a circle. This circle has two things that have to be read from it. So one is size. The size means the actual number. So it is the average per year of the total amount of suicides. So, for example, here in Russia we have 3,734. And then the intensity of the colors are relating to the suicide rate. So if you have Canada here, it has a similar suicide rate than the US, but their total amount of deaths are a lot less, right? So it's a similar situation, but is what I started to see here is that suicide is not it's not a generalizable matter, but it's also very particular. So everyone has different reasons to do it, even if we can try to generalize with economics or weather or find reasons. We still, like, everyone has different reasons, right? They don't just agree on saying, oh, the weather is really bad here, so I'll take my own life. It doesn't make sense. So I started to what you can do with this, and I'll send you the link, but let me know if you have Tableau, so I can also send you the file, because the website can be difficult. So what you have here is these sliders that, for example, if I go like this, so I have countries with a GDP from 70 to 71 to blah, blah, to 17,000, or like that, right? So you can have a lot of combinations of data points. So you can see that, for example, there's not many countries that go over 20. Over 20 suicides per year, per 100,000 persons. Right, so there's a lot to argue here. So you can see, like, find the countries that have the worst issues, or you can see if rich countries have problems with suicide. So you can look at it in various ways. You can play with it. But I decided to paint 5 readings for it, or develop. So these are the rich countries, and we can see here that all these countries are have a high GDP, and also if you see just by looking at the circles, maybe the good thing about the circles is that you don't really need to see the numbers to understand what's happening. You look at the circles, and most of them have a tint of red, which means, for example, here this is the color range. So all of these countries are mostly red, and if you're blue, you're on the good side. You're kind of like in good shape about suicide culture. So this, you can see clearly here. There's more on here. One great case in Japan thing. So they're in great shape, but they also have really high suicides, which I believe is, from what I've researched, is kind of like a cultural thing. So suicide is not so frowned upon there for cultural reasons, right? So here's Latin America. They're all in similar shape economically, but also in suicide rates. So what we have here is from neutral to blue circles mostly, and low numbers of suicide rates. So the highest number is this one, Uruguay, a small country, so it's questionable, and Guyana, right? But these two countries have like real low populations. So what does that make me think? So like, it seems that suicide rate is not is different within small populations and large populations. So in small populations, there's a trend for having high suicide rate, also because it's probably better documented. It's easier to see and follow, whilst in big countries like Brazil or Russia, I will see afterwards, their populations are so large that it's hard to follow unless there's something specific, like in the US with the weapons. So for example, in Mexico is a really violent country for murder and crime violence, but about suicide, it has one of the lowest suicide rates, and it's still over 100 million population. So it's interesting to see this. Latin America's, you could say it's happy. The former USSR, where here Lithuania is, where is it? Here. Lithuania is the most intense threat, but as you can see, when you compare the actual impact of deaths, like Ukraine seems to have a bigger impact, even if it has a smaller rate. This means more deaths, just basically, and in Russia is the worst probably is the worst country in the world about suicide. But because their rate is not the worst. It's I don't know. The data works cosmetically for it, but once you see it like this, the problem in Lithuania is not that bad. So the research for Lithuania showed that it used to be a really rural country before the USSR. So when the USSR took over, a lot of people that depended on selling farm goods had no business anymore, and were just exploited. So they just, it's like that started kind of like a cultural trend of suicide as, I don't know if as a protest is that's a good word, but it's like a reaction to the oppression from the USSR, from the government of the Soviets. And you can see it throughout all this former USSR, right? So then we have like the isolated, because suicide rate is not very well followed, especially if there's no strong institutions around it. So these are like outliers that are still very interesting. Republic of Korea has really it's similar to Japan. The Philippines is one of the happiest countries, or like less prone to suicide, let's say. Thailand is good; it's in good shape. Singapore is really bad. Sri Lanka is kind of like one of the worst cases too, because it's bad, double bad. So it's poor, and it also has bad suicide rate, which is worrying. And it's something like here there's a deeper issue clearly, and maybe it should be further researched. South Africa is doing well, it's doing okay economically, and almost no suicides, despite all the bad things you can say about all these countries. It's different when you see all this data. And lastly, the Mediterranean, where I was surprised to find the best numbers for this. So there's still a few here in the Balkans. They have a recent history of war, especially during the time of the data where the data is from. But I think it's maybe it should be good to follow how it develops in the coming years, because what we have here is a double combo of positives mostly, with Italy, decent suicide rate. It's white, it's not blue, but it's okay, but it's still a big number, right? And Spain is similar. Portugal is a bit bad shape there, but still is okay. And the Balkans, well, like I have the Greece is, despite all the recent economic problems, is in great shape. Turkey too. Cyprus. These are the lowest. Israel is so. I think that here in the Mediterranean, these countries have a great balance of good weather. They're not like the richest countries in the world, but they're in good shape, and they have access to the Schengen area, most of them, or the possibility of travel, and I think communication too. I don't know. It's very interesting to see this. So I guess if people are worried about suicide or something like that, it wouldn't be crazy to think of the Mediterranean as an option to live. And like I said, there's many ways of looking at this data, and we can go specific or we can go regional, which is what I think was the greatest finding of this project. And hopefully you enjoy it. I will send you the links to share it, and let me know if anything doesn't work. Cheers.